the Whitecaps. They were the story of the league. And was this a surprise to you? Because you've been one of the MLS pundits that's followed, the Whitecaps a lot closer than most over the last few years. We always see you popping in on Zoom calls and whatnot. So what did you really make of this Whitecaps team? How much of a surprise was it under a first-year manager from Europe, too, we must remember, which is not something we see a whole lot of in this league?
Jesper Sorensen got my Coach of the Year vote. And while there were some very worthy candidates elsewhere in the league, for me, this is a truly unprecedented season for both him as a coach in year one and for the club and for the squad, because they did something that no one's ever done, essentially, for sure in the modern history of MLS. And really, I think you could argue ever, which is to have a run to the CONCACAF Champions Cup final, playing some absolute giants and playing them off the park, or playing them at the very least, to a stalemate and getting the results that you need to advance. And then there was a little bit of a lull, right? They had a hangover from CCC, but it wasn't that long after that, despite tons of injuries. Just it seemed like a constant parade of injuries and other availability challenges, and the psychological weight of that run and the way that it ended. They're suddenly climbing back up the table, and they finish, but for a FC Dallas side fighting for their lives on the final day and a very untimely red card. This would have been the best team in the regular season in the West. And no one's ever done that. If you look back at the TFC team that had a great CONCACAF Champions run in 2018, you look at the Seattle Sounders that won the dang thing, they all were just crippled by that experience down the stretch of that year. So the resilience of the group, the resilience of the tactical ideas is so impressive. And again, as we said, I don't know, but I think in places on the depth chart, you guys would know better than I, but are we on to the fifth string in a few spots in the 11? I mean, it feels like it. And then, replacements hop on and they get hurt. And, so to juggle all that and to have such stylistic continuity and such a proactive approach, which I think is part of the Achilles heel, maybe, that made him vulnerable over the weekend and makes this series more interesting than the two squads' records would indicate. But other than that, I'm just tremendously impressed. I think they are the best of storylines in MLS this season.
And of course, both of us were in Mexico City for when that CONCACAF Champions final did not go the way that the Vancouver Whitecaps would have hoped. And players seemed shell-shocked after that game. What did you think in that moment that the season would come to for the Vancouver Whitecaps, considering, all the time you spent around MLS? And what's impressed you since then about this Whitecaps team?
In that moment, at that, at Unam, in that incredible, quirky, ancient stadium there, and the looks on those guys' faces when they spoke to us reporters, just the nature of that environment, the nature of the experience, what we learned in the days afterwards. I think the Whitecaps were going to great lengths to not talk about all the intestinal issues and the travelers' challenges and so forth. But it's just the combination of physical, psychological, mental. At that point, I think if you were to even cast your mind forward to the postseason, you say, if we're in, we've done well, right? Because at that moment, you've lost the big battle, and I don't know, maybe this is a tortured metaphor, but the ship is aground, or maybe it's sinking outright. So to stabilize things over the weeks that followed, and again to remain so faithful to the way they played, and I think they've talked about it at that point. I think the belief maybe was forged in the run and in the ways that they played against Mexico's biggest and richest clubs in CONCACAF Champions. But there was clearly a buy-in established in those first few months of the season that sustained the group and kept the belief and kept them playing the way that they wanted to play. And eventually it told, and that's just so impressive to me, that to do what they did. And then, I mean, we could have our own episode about Müller, right? And maybe you guys have had it, but to be chosen by one of the highest profile free agent arrivals, highest profile designated players in the league this season or over the last several seasons, and for him to have plenty of options here and abroad and around the world, and to pick the Whitecaps, I think that tells you that it's not just me that found this a compelling story.
That's it. I mean, I guess I kind of want to pick at that thread because it is fascinating to hear an outside perspective. Like, what was kind of that reception when finding out Thomas Müller would be signing the Whitecaps? We know in Vancouver he's been a massive deal, but just outside, Like, because this is something that we don't see. Like, this isn't the Whitecaps to have a star that magnitude. How have you noticed that kind of, affecting the way this group is perceived now that they've got a legitimate superstar?
It's just so many ways. This is he is in many ways, and it's you could almost, I guess, contend that maybe even it's not shining nationally and continentally as much as it could if Sonny hadn't arrived. Son Heung-min coming in, an even bigger name in a lot of ways, just in terms of the global reach, the power of his stardom and his brand, not only in the UK but in Asia, across Asia. I mean, he is what we're seeing just in general terms on on the league website and in terms of the media relevance. I mean, he is Messi level, right? Is speaking of Son, and Muller is not necessarily that kind of personality, but when you look at the on-field quality, the psychology, the mentality he brings, his professionalism, his personality, to be able to improve you so dramatically with one body added to the roster, and then to make you so much more relevant in every conceivable context. And I don't have as much of the local perspective, but I have very little doubts and have seen little tidbits that suggest that he's just put the club in a different stratosphere. And maybe that would have happened even if he wasn't doing the business on the pitch as well. But for all those things to be in dovetailing the way they are, it was the perfect reinforcement, in retrospect.
And the Whitecaps and Thomas Muller, of course, are getting into that first round best of 3 series against an FC Dallas team that they just lost to. And FC Dallas, of course, on decision day didn't have Logan Farrington, didn't have Peter Musa, who I think will receive some MLS MVP votes with the way that he's played since Luciano Acosta has left that club. What do you see in this Whitecaps versus Dallas series? Could Dallas pull off an upset in this one?
I think it's very possible. And when you look at that result, certainly there's asterisks here. The early red card does just fundamentally change games. But wow, what a perfect way for the 7 seed to build belief, to have just gone to that place you're about to play twice and get the result. I think there is a challenge, and after waxing poetic and singing the praises of Sorensen and his group, now I got to ding them a little bit. They were vulnerable in a way, even with 11 men, they were so vulnerable to balls over the top, to direct play and pace in behind and looking for transition moments on the part of Dallas. That I was a little taken aback. Maybe that's just built into that's just part of the risk calculation that the game model involves. But I think they're going to have to figure out a way to manage that a little bit better now that you have 2 generally classy strikers up top who have a great understanding. I mean, for Dallas to do what they did without Musa and Farrington was so impressive. They had a supporting cast really step up in a big way. I do think that pound for pound across the roster, this is a much more talented Whitecaps team. But Dallas have been, I would say, they're on the podium maybe for best stories behind the Whitecaps, especially since Acosta left. As you mentioned, you don't normally expect to see a team resurrected and lose, I think, just once. I think they've only lost once since Acosta was shipped off to Brazil. But they had an underperforming, disgruntled superstar whose departure opened up a sort of a reinvention. FCD has kind of come together as a group. They've all bought in. They understand who they are. They're scrappy. It's not always the most beautiful soccer, but man, it can be very effective. And they've just been on an incredible run. And we were talking about how amazing it would be if they made the playoffs period to be in the wildcard spots, and for them to finish 7th. I believe they were in 12th and had lost one in their last however many months, or had won one in the last however many months, and now they've lost one in the last 2 months, I believe, something to that effect. This is trouble. This is very much a potential Cinderella with enormous amounts of momentum behind them.
But of course, with the best of 3, one thing I do suppose it helps with is the jeopardy, right? Because one games, as we know, can flip on their head. The thing with this Whitecaps group, for the most part, they've had, they're one-off, like losing to Dallas, losing away to Columbus, I think was one, losing away to San Jose, at home drawing Houston. Over the best of 3, I think most fans are expecting to beat Dallas. Okay, should we take them at face value? The big worry that fans then have is LAFC, because LAFC's owned the Whitecaps, for lack of a better word, in the playoffs. And that's kind of been the story of the Whitecaps, right? Early 2010s, they lost to that great LA Galaxy team. In the mid 2010s, it was a parade to the playoffs to just get beat by their Cascadia rivals. And now it's LAFC. Like, Charles, heading into a potential series with LAFC, do you think the Whitecaps now have what it takes? Because, I mean, what a matchup that would be on paper. Like Son, Buanga, Müller, Berhalter, etc. All these stars that have kind of amassed on both sides, and the level of both teams. Could this be the year the Whitecaps get it done, especially if maybe a Blackman is back by then?
Well, it's a huge factor to have home field advantage against anyone but San Diego, right? And you know, what San Diego did is incredible this season, but there's always, I think, a bit of a lack of credit, a lack of accrued credit when an expansion side does what they did. We saw it with St. Louis. There's other some maybe comparable examples where they will host if everything goes chalk and Whitecaps and San Diego advance, San Diego would host. But they've got to prove to people that they can win knockout games and that they have a collective experience and mentality for the second season, as the term I used earlier. The Whitecaps, granted, Müller wasn't there, but most of this squad was on the ride for Conca Champions, right? So they know what a tournament run looks like. Nobody likes to go up and play on that turf. Is it overblown? Well, again, we could probably have our own episode about that, right? Is the BC Place turf as nightmarish as visitors often depict it? Any way you slice it, it's there's a home field advantage there. And then if they're filling up the lower bowl for one or maybe all of these postseason games, that's huge too. Because I got to tell you guys, I'm fascinated to see if I get to go to my first Whitecaps game in Vancouver, because I've been to many MLS destinations over my decades in the biz, but I haven't gone up there yet. And I've heard it's a vibe, when it's a big crowd and it's rocking and the home team is playing well. So, this is the time when you cash in those credits that you've built over the course of the season with the relationship with your fans, the reputation you've established among your competitors. But LAFC is going to be a really tough out, and maybe the Dallas series is an optimal warm up, because they've been under Steve Trundle, fundamentally a transition dominated or transition centered team. Now they're just doing it at an elite level, right? They're always extremely good with Denny Buanga, the menace that he is out on one flank. Now you have two blue chip A-lister type players who are just destroying teams in transition. They're incisive, they're classy. The 1v1s, I mean, you just and again, Jesper has to think through some of this stuff, because a lot of Vancouver's system leads to defending in space, defending 1v1 capably. You do not want to be defending 1v1 against Denny Buanga or Son. It's brutal. So there'll be a cat and mouse aspect to that series that I think will be fascinating.